Hi, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple minutes to let people get a chance to log in. So hold tight. We'll just wait one more minute since we only have 30 minutes. So I want to make sure I get all the content in. All right, let's get started. Thanks so much for attending the webinar today. I really appreciate it. We're going to be talking today about metric governance. So just appreciate your time. We'll try to get done by 12:25 or so Central Time to leave time for any follow-up questions or anything like that, or to give you passing time to your next meeting. So let's jump right in. I'm Kevin Campbell. I'm the CEO and founding partner of DTA Healthcare Solutions. We're a healthcare consulting and services and products firm. We've created a tool called the Compendium Data Catalog for Healthcare, and that's a solution that really helps you pull together all your reports and dashboards and metrics and you name it, whatever information objects you have in your organization into one place so it's searchable, the definitions are readily available, and things are well defined and have ownership and things like that. So that's what Compendium is, and the company, again, that supports that and develops that is DTA Healthcare Solutions. We're Minneapolis based. In case you don't know what Minnesota looks like, that's a map for you there. Okay, so I'm going to start with some definitions. We'll get into that. Then talk a little bit about the case for metric governance. Why do we think that that's something that would be useful? We'll talk a little bit about what metric governance looks like in day-to-day practice. So if you operationalize it, what does that look like? And then again, if there are any questions, we can answer those. I will answer questions throughout. You should be able to submit questions through the GoToWebinar settings. Hopefully you can find that. And I'll try to keep an eye on on any questions that pop up. But if I miss them, I'll try to get them by the end of the call. First of all, I want to start with a definition of enterprise data governance. At DTA, our working definition is enterprise data governance is the discipline of defining, monitoring, and managing data from initial data entry and capture all the way through to the use of that data in visualization and analysis in order to make decisions, and then taking that into account across the whole enterprise, the whole organization. So often we have analytics happening in different departments. Sometimes those departments are operating in silos. Really, enterprise data governance is a discipline meant to organize all of that from across the organization. So this schematic that you see on your screen is what I would say is the current definition of enterprise data governance. If you go out and look on the web, you're going to see plenty of different definitions. this is by no means the, the international standard, but pretty commonly you'll see enterprise data governance as the top level concept. And then underneath that, sometimes, or more recently, that's getting further defined into data management and data use. So data governance often talks about governing that data at the management level. So we're bringing in data from sources, maybe into an integration environment like an enterprise data warehouse. We're storing that, mapping it, cleaning it up, things like that. That's in that data management section. And we often just call that data governance, which is a little confusing with the overarching enterprise data governance. And then more and more we're seeing people talk about analytics governance, which is looking at the use of the data to make decisions. So are we using the same definitions? How are we approaching analytics in a standardized and cohesive and reusable way in our organization? And really in this sense, analytics covers true data analysis, but also reporting and visualization, dashboarding, things like that. And then, of course, advanced analytics and data science as well. That falls under that analytics governance. So it's really all about removing the black box nature of analytics and making things more transparent, and then also making the practitioners in those areas be able to reuse and share and leverage each other's collective knowledge in order to move the organization forward in a non-siloed way. So this is what I would say is the current definition of that enterprise data governance, higher level construct. We're talking today about metrics. So what is it that's so special about metrics that we feel that it's deserving of its own category, if you will? Well, we're coming from a healthcare perspective. So our company focuses in the healthcare industry. We've worked with a lot of healthcare providers, and this is what we see at those different provider organizations, that metrics are really, they're huge. They garner a lot of attention from executives on down to even frontline staff in some ways, but certainly, nurse managers and directors, and then across the operational and business units. Metrics are just, they're a big deal. They really, we think that that's one of the reasons that they deserve more attention. There's low tolerance for errors, so we need metrics to be right for a lot of reasons. One big reason is that they're often tied to compensation, both in the sense of compensation of clinicians, for example, on their performance, but also they could be tied to executive compensation, and then even outside of the organization's reimbursement is tied to metrics as well. So metrics need to be correct. There's a lot of eyeballs on it, and there's a lot of risk if that information is not correct. Metrics can be highly complex. So if you look at a metric like readmission rate, there's a lot of inclusions and exclusions, but in the grander scheme of metrics at a healthcare organization, it's relatively straightforward and simple, but even that is complicated. As you get into more clinical metrics, where you're looking at things like adherence to best practices around stroke care or diabetes care or cancer care, as we're looking at that, as we're looking at metrics of high quality care, now we're getting into very fine-grained metrics with lots more inclusions and exclusions. So it's really important that, again, we get those metrics right, and we find a way to deal with that complexity in a way that is not overwhelming to the organization. Metrics often conflict, which causes conflict. So we have metrics in different departments that sound the same, like readmission rate or average length of stay, or there's plenty of other metrics like that. They sound the same between the finance definition and or the name of the finance metric and the name of maybe the quality metric or the metric used in performance improvement, but they are actually very different in their definitions. The numbers come out differently. So two people show up to a meeting with similar metrics and they have different results. And that can cause a lot of problems, a lot of drama in organizations. And we see that all the time. There's tons of metric chaos that happens out of that. Metrics are resource and waste intensive. So there's just a lot going on with metrics. And in the scenario of that I just mentioned about people showing up to meetings and having different numbers, sorting through that takes a ton of time. It takes a lot of time for the analysts who then have to go and try to compare and work with their counterpart in another department to figure out why don't our numbers match? What do you have that I don't have? What system are you going off of that I'm not? And trying to work through that can be very, very challenging and can cause a lot of waste. So what we're suggesting is that it's time for metric governance to be a more formalized discipline underneath the enterprise data governance umbrella. So we have on the left, we still have data management. Again, that's data entry through integration. We have data use in the middle, analytics governance, that's reporting, analysis, data science. But then metric governance, we think should be its own category. And we put that under business logic ratification. That was the phrase that we came up with, meaning it's really, you're stamping that definition. So if we think about analytics, you're often looking for, answers. You've got questions and you're trying to find answers to those questions, and it's really an unknown. Metrics are a settled science in a sense. So you've worked through this metric, you've validated it, you've worked with stakeholders, it's accepted as a correct representation of performance in the organization, and you want to stamp that, you want to ratify that, so that now going forward we can watch that metric and we can use it as a proxy for performance. So that's the difference there between the more open-ended analytics governance and then the managing metrics and all the work and the things that go along with that. And so under, in a healthcare organization, under metric governance, we have, certainly clinical, operational, financial, you name it, metrics. It really, there's lots of different kinds of metrics, as those of you who've worked in this industry know very well. Okay, so why is this so important to have metric governance? I've talked a little bit about it, but let's drill down a little bit into why we think this is important. So again, I mentioned metrics garner a lot of attention, and metric governance builds trust. So you have a ton of attention for metrics, and you have a formalized process to manage these metrics, and that's going to build trust in those things. So when metric definitions are transparent, when we know how it's defined, when it's defined in one place, that trust grows if metric governance is done properly, of course. Talked about low tolerance for errors because of ties to compensation and just general performance. And I didn't mention also, a lot of these metrics go out on your organization's website. So that's about as visible as you can get. That's public. So that's another reason they need to be accurate. Metric governance ensures results are correct and that they stay that way. So ensures is maybe a little bit of a strong term because, as any of you who've worked in analytics and healthcare know, you can never know 100% that you're 100% accurately reflecting reality. But what it does is, to the best of our ability, after all the validation that we've done for that metric, it's a way of again, ratifying that logic and ensuring that it is correct. And then with metric governance, we provide ways to make sure it stays that way. Data has a sneaky way of moving around on us sometimes. So, and over time, workflow changes in the EMR or fields change. And so we need to have a way of monitoring those things to see when they do shift, how do we approach that to rectify that and make sure that that metric is still, again, accurately reflecting performance. We talked about metrics being highly complex, and what metric governance does is it helps encapsulate that logic. And what that means is really just separates metrics from being, in a sea of metrics on a report, for example. So maybe you create a report, you've got a whole bunch of metrics, they're all just kind of together in the code underneath, and they use similar populations, so they're really intermixed, and it's hard to address those metrics one at a time, which is what you really need to do when you have something that is this complex. Good metric governance is addressing metrics as individual entities, and what that does is it encapsulates, puts into a box, if you will, that particular metric and the logic that goes with that. It makes it a lot easier to deal with when you just have to deal with one metric at a time. We talked about metrics often conflicting between departments. Ideally, with metric governance, your metrics are living in one place. They're defined in one place. All the attributes you need around those of ownership, inclusions, exclusions, categories, has it gone through the full certification process? All those things are in one place, and so that should help keep conflict from happening. Now, part of this is a technical assumption that I'm making. So when I'm talking about the metrics living in one place, you can have metric governance without having metrics technically living in the same place. But when you do have a tool that can centralize those metrics, it makes metric governance a lot more doable, a lot easier. Talked about metrics being resource and waste intensive. Having definitions and calculations and ownership transparent. When you show up to a meeting, and I've seen this happen, instead of just people swirling, wondering why these metrics are different, they can pull up the definitions and say, okay, look, here's the difference in the inclusions, exclusions. This is why it's different. This is coming from the billing system. This is coming from the EMR, for example. So it helps, that transparency helps avoid some of the swirl in trying to figure out why we have conflicting metrics, for example. So it's making the whole process more efficient when you have good metric governance. So I mentioned a technical approach. I'm going to show you what we do for our Compendium Metric Hub, which is our metric repository as part of our Compendium data catalog. This is, there are other data catalogs. This is not the only way. I'm just going to show you, because this is our product, how we approach this. But the concepts, I think, will be useful, to hopefully to any of you who are attending. So within our data catalog, the Compendium data catalog, we track metrics like we do with any other metadata. And I'm going to turn on my little laser pointer here so you can see what I'm pointing at. So within the data catalog, we track things like data warehouse data definitions and report lists and their definitions, things like that. But then metrics become a metadata object as well. But then within kind of the extension to that, the Compendium Metric Hub, the metric output actually lives in a central standardized database so that they can be pulled into reports and dashboards and even extracts, for example. So they're pulling from the same place. So you have metrics coming in from whatever source it might be. You have the definition of those metrics being very clear and transparent to the organization. And then you have the actual metric output that can then be pulled from that one place into multiple places, so that if the metric definition changes, it gets changed here in the catalog, and then will automatically get pushed out to those things that pull from this metric hub. So that's the tool implementation that we've done around this. And then, manually entered metrics are a little bit of a different animal, but we found they always have a pesky way of continuing to exist in any organization we work with. Obviously, you want to automate as much as you can with your metrics, but sometimes you have to enter data manually. Maybe it's employee engagement scores that you just get in an aggregate level on a PDF or something like that. So, but those can still have their definitions. They can still have their owners in the data catalog. They just have their metric output. Instead of being pulled from the system, they're pulled from a data entry form, for example. So how does this look in real life? How does metric management look when we're using good metric governance processes? Again, I'm going to show you what it looks like in our tool in the Compendium data catalog. But there are other tools that you could use to manage your metrics in a similar way. So hopefully you'll get some ideas from this slide. So here's just an example of just a slice of the data catalog that shows metrics. We've got several different kinds of metrics listed here. In an actual large-scale implementation of this, you'd probably have a lot of different categories of metrics: quality, financial, operational, et cetera. But at any rate, you've got that list of metrics available for people to look at and find definitions from. This is an example of a detail page for that metric, just to give you an idea of the types of things that you want to track with good metric governance. Obviously, the name is key. That seems obvious, but one key component to metric governance is that metrics are named differently when they're different. So if you have a finance readmission rate, or let's say a finance length of stay, and you have an operational length of stay, you can have both of those. They both have their purposes, but they have to be named different so that people know right away that which one they're dealing with. Another example would be if you're trying to replicate the CMS readmission rate metric versus perhaps having an internal readmission rate metric. You want to be able to say in the name, you want to distinguish those as best you can. And obviously, you can drill down into the metric to find out what are the real differences there. So name, description, just a plain English description, inclusion, exclusion logic, and then information like when was it last refreshed, when was the definition last updated. So when did somebody go in and, okay, maybe there were new exclusions that were added to this metric. Those are the sorts of things that would trigger that update date, so people know how recently it was changed. When was it originally created? And then things like, category information. What type of metric is this? Where did it come from? Who's the owner? So if you have a sponsor or an owner, subject matter expert is another way of saying that for that particular metric. They're kind of that go-to person for questions on the metric and for definition. A technical owner or developer might be the person who actually writes the code for that particular metric. So you may have that subject matter expert probably isn't somebody who's able to actually write the code. So this is kind of their partner to be able to produce that metric. And then other things, if you move a metric along through a governance process, you may start with the metric being in development, and then in validation, and then final or certified or something along those lines. You want to be able to show people that the stage that metric is in, so they know what to expect from that particular metric. So those are just an example. You can get a lot more detailed. You can split out the inclusion, exclusion logic into their own components. You can add, a lot more things that could be helpful around metrics. But the key is to have a catalog somewhere where those metrics are defined. And this is just an example of some other components. So again, in our Compendium Metric Hub, we'll show the actual SQL code, the code that creates that metric, so that if you're an analyst, you can copy that, you can run it, and you can validate it really on the fly. And that's as transparent as anything else for folks who can understand that kind of code. You might also have things like, where is this metric used? So in this case, it's utilized on a dashboard, a report, another dashboard. So giving an idea of that can be really helpful to folks to see, where does that metric go? And finally, metric wouldn't be complete without goals. So adding goals and managing goals for that metric is important. So in our tool, we have the ability to add, as many baselines, goals, thresholds that you want to be able to report with. All right, this is just an example then of what it could look like to have, to have a metric. If you have a metric repository and you're pulling individual metrics onto the report from a standard metric repository, it's really easy to pull those in. Just show the ones you want. You can filter, but it's all here with the goals and then trends and just the performance against those goals. So those are all things that become a lot easier to do when you have those metrics centralized into one place. And then, drilling down into the metric and showing metric detail. Again, when you have a standard way of approaching those, that becomes a lot easier. And to answer your question, Dave, yes, I will share the slides after the talk. Happy to do that. So that was, I went a couple minutes further than I wanted to there, than I promised. Apologize for that, but that's really all we had. Wanted to just give a brief case for why we think that it's long overdue that metric governance gets its due focus and becomes a real specific discipline underneath the overarching discipline of enterprise data governance. So I hope this was helpful. We will share the slides afterwards. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to come to this webinar. I'm just going to take a look and make sure I didn't miss any questions here. If you do have any questions, we've got a couple more minutes. Feel free to throw them into the Q&A. Otherwise, make sure I'm seeing it okay. Yeah. Yeah, otherwise, thanks so much. I hope you all have a great day. Take care. Ami, thank you for your comment. Good to see you, sort of, as much as I can.